Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar discussion topic video. This one I want to talk about basically my thoughts on the upcoming Avatar Netflix live action show. So I've had a few people asking for my thoughts on this because I haven't done a video on it in kind of like a really long time, basically the week it was basically announced, and I haven't really touched on it since. And if you didn't see those videos, you don't really know like why, given that I cover everything else, have I not been covering any like updates on this? Well, the main reason is that one, I don't think any of the updates, if you can really call them updates, have really been any information on the show outside of that initial "this is a thing that exists." Everything else has pretty much just been Mike or Brian, or both, basically just saying, stop contacting us about when auditions will be available. We'll let you know when auditions will be available. We're still in the early planning stages. That's pretty much been most of the updates on this show. There's been no real substance, no actor announcements, of course, no visuals. So it's just a concept piece of art and then what they said about kind of what this thing actually is. That's why I don't feel there's been enough to kind of justify doing a news video on it, because there's no information, and I don't want to put out a video that is misleading and saying like, oh, update on the live action show, and it's just, oh yeah, auditions aren't taking place, and just leave it at that. So so in this one I just want to talk about like my thoughts and I suppose basically why I'm not actually excited pretty much at all for this show. And if you've seen my previous video, you know that that's my opinion on this. So yeah, I think it comes down to this. I like the idea of Avatar doing something in live action. I don't like the idea that this is a live action adaptation, a live action remake. To me, putting those two things together is just a big no-no to me. You already have the story of Avatar: The Last Airbender done in a visual medium. You don't need to do it in another different visual medium, like live action, especially live action, given our previous history with live action in Avatar. So in so many ways, I'm just like, this is not a particularly fun announcement. One, I think it's probably one of the worst in all of media attempts to do something is a transition from animation to live action adaptation. I don't think they work most of the time. And just saying, oh, Mike and Brian are involved doesn't make me more excited for that or not, because, look, I get they weren't particularly involved in the Last Airbender movie, but they were involved to a certain degree, and, look how most people consider that movie. Secondly, the fact that it is a live action, like, adaptation of the show. We already have ATLA, we already have Book 1, I don't know why we need to see that again for like the third time here. We've seen Book 1 done in the movie, we've seen Book 1 done in the show itself. Why are we trying to do it again here? I really don't get it. Because to me, this has the same excitement level, probably less actually of an excitement level than it would if, say, Dark Horse, the next Avatar comics that they announced, if they just announced that they were doing a comic adaptation of Avatar: The Last Airbender Book 1. That to me would be more exciting than this live action remake, just because at least then it's still sort of in the, animation, kind of comic style visuals of the universe, as opposed to trying to, force it into live action. But like I said, I would have been fine if this was just something in the Avatar universe that was live action. I think the idea of telling a unique original story in live action could work. That way you can still incorporate it into the main continuity, it just happens to be told in a different medium. But because then you could specifically place it wherever you want, you can address the limitations that you have with this universe in live action, and choose to very sparingly maybe use bending, have the characters of focus maybe be non-benders and benders only come in every so often. I think you could tell a more interesting story in live action that way, something that's unique, something that's original, because ultimately, from my perspective, Mike and Brian have been on a sort of hiatus from running a show since the end of Korra. They've been obviously working on the supplementary material, the comics, novels, stuff like that, but in general, in terms of their show running, what we know them for, they said they were on a break from the show, and what they're ending their break for is to come back and do this live action remake of the show, an adaptation. And it just feels to me like, why is this what you're coming back to do and not something new, unique, and original within your original continuity? What's the reasoning behind this necessarily? Like, okay, maybe it's just that they want to try their hand at doing some live action stuff. That's fine. Well, why not do something unique and original? Why, again, do the remake when you could do something new? And I think I'm just frustrated with, like, really, this is the thing where, like, they're going to be spending so much of their time doing this. And again, we don't know if this is going to have any impact on, like, the other stuff that they are involved with regards to, like, Mike, obviously heavily assisted on The Rise of Kyoshi. He's the writer for the Korra comics. Mike and Brian both assist, in a way, like, on a bit of everything in the Avatar franchise. I hope what they're doing on this show doesn't get in the way of that, because for me, all of this content is so much more interesting than the live action show. Like, this book alone, like, if you're an Avatar fan and are excited for the live action show but haven't read this, it's kind of like, what are you doing? Like, this is so much more important than whatever they're going to do in this live action thing, unless they reveal something brand new and unique that we've never heard about before in the show. It's going to be hard to just beat brand new content with something that is just going to be a remake. So just in general, like, I don't see what there is to be excited for with this, because the concept, the idea of just, we get to see everything in live action, I don't care. I really don't care about that idea of that. I don't need to see bending in live action or anything like that, because I think it's done just as well in the shows, Avatar and Korra. I think it's done well in the comics, and now that we've had a proper novel, I think it's done well here as well, and I don't think we need to see it in live action. I would have liked to see it in live action. It was telling something new, but I don't need to see what we've already seen before again here. Why not just, tell ATLA in every single medium that we possibly can? Do novels for adapting, do a novel adaptation, do a comic adaptation, whatever you want, web series. Why not just do all that? Why live action specifically? I just don't see what it's coming from. Second point is that I think one thing they did say is that they plan to sort of, I can't remember their exact wording, but like expand on what they'd already done. So they're telling ATLA, but they're kind of going to expand the story in some way. And that's probably the one thing that's like interesting to me from the original announcement, but it also creates a lot of problems in that case. If they're not doing a pretty much, accurate just adaptation of what we already have, what do we do with that new material? Like, you can't suddenly say that because the live action show added in this new part of book one, that is immediately now part of the like animated continuity and stuff like that. It's going to create so many kind of confusing situations of like, is it just that the live action show is a completely different continuity, but it's take on the same thing, and then you're creating like alternate universes, like here's the live action universe versus the animated universe, and because this one they're doing this so much more kind of recent compared to like 2005 when Avatar started. This is their sort of new take on the story. That is the way they consider it to be now. And does that mean it's more important than the animated continuity? And then when it all comes out, and what if it is a success? If it is super, super successful, what does that really say going forward? Because at that point you think, oh, like, wouldn't they just then focus on live action stuff going forward instead of the animated continuity? Because I think a few too many people are thinking that the success of this Netflix live action show will lead to them getting approved to do another animated series, when I really don't think that would be the case at all. I think any of like the higher ups, like business people involved in this, would just think that, oh, Avatar in live action is super popular because season 1 of our Netflix Avatar show was popular. Why would they immediately go, okay, we'll approve you for a different medium than the thing that just came out that was successful? Would it not be just that they get approved for season 2, 3, and potentially something more? And at that point, we've gone down the complete opposite path. We've praised this ancillary thing with the hope of getting something that we really care about, but we've just told them that we care about this other thing that some people are interested in, but not everyone actually wants. And it's going to be very confusing here in that it's why I feel that like everyone needs to say this. Like if you ultimately are invested in this show because you want there to be an animated series somewhere down the line, you have to make that very clear. I think if you're making a public statement about this show, like every time you say it, that I'm excited for this if it's going to lead to a new animated series, if it's successful. But I think that needs to be said. Otherwise, they're just going to interpret it as, oh, you guys don't want animation anymore, you just want live action. Because there is still that sort of kind of shadow in a way over Korra and how Nick handled it towards the end, of like the budget being cut. That's why we got the episode Remembrances. The last like 2 seasons, like roughly 2 seasons of the show, not really airing on the channel anymore, and it being sort of online first. Like it wasn't treated, Korra, at the end particularly well, and it felt like Nickelodeon was kind of almost like giving up towards the end, as quality as the last 2 seasons were of Korra. It felt like the channel itself, the company, sort of gave up on it. So it's kind of like, how much confidence is there? And if we switch to live action, like, is that what we really want as a fandom, for just the new big things, the big projects that Mike and Brian are the heads of? Do we want that to just be what we're doing, and them to never actually come back and potentially ever do another animated series and so on? Like, are we just going to be books and comics is continuing that universe, and we're doing this in our new universe and so on? That's where I just am so confused about why they decided to do this and what it means, and that if it's a success, what does that mean for the franchise? If it's a failure, what does that mean for the franchise? If it's just middle of the road, what does it mean? And to me, the way I look at it is that if it's a failure, then it's like, okay, Avatar in live action just doesn't work. That the idea, you abandon it completely, and you have to then go back to the fact that people care about the animated continuity with the comics and the new novels and stuff like that, and you double down on that. But if it is a failure, then do Netflix not think that, oh, the franchise is a failure, even though it's the different medium that was probably a big part of that? If it's middle of the road, it's kind of like, does it get a second season? Do they get confirmed for more? Do they just casually cancel it, and what happens there? And then if it's a success, I don't think it immediately means we're getting new animation. I think it's just that it means we get more live action and whatever. Like, is there a bigger plan for this, I suppose, is ultimately the idea. Where is the future direction of the franchise? And I think that's where, just across like Dark Horse, the books, whatever Mike and Brian are doing with this live action project, that's what I'm not quite seeing with the franchise and its direction going forward. And that with no new animation in any way hinted at on the horizon, like, what is the center point of the franchise going forward? Because the comics are taking it relatively slow in terms of telling the story. It's going to be, at this stage, probably like, if they continue this path that they're on right now in the comics, it's probably going to be 10 plus years before we have like the comics covering like adult, like 20-year-old Aang. Like, I think a lot of people want to see those big events from the characters when they're older. So when's that happening? The introduction of novels does open the door to us getting more of the stories that I think we want as Avatar fans. But again, apart from this book and then the second Kyoshi book, The Shadow of Kyoshi, we don't have any other novels announced just yet. So hopefully they get on that and they can tell stuff like the Iroh story in one of these books, or whatever they need to do, because I think the novels open the door for so many stories to be told. But again, what does anything about the reception of this live action show actually do to the franchise? And like, I assume from their point of view, the idea is that a show on Netflix is going to bring in a massive audience. That regardless of if they're Avatar fans or non-Avatar fans, suddenly people are going to be talking about Avatar again because of the announcement of this new Netflix show and it being released, and people will watch it. But then the reception is just like, what? Are they doing this to just get people to get people invested in Avatar because it's a Netflix live action thing, and then to push them towards like what, buying the Blu-rays, buying the DVDs, what, merchandise, comics, what? Or is it just they want live action to be their new thing going forward? That's where I don't know. That's where I'd like Mike and Brian to come out and be like, here is like our direction for the franchise. because especially with the Korra comics, again, like we're dealing with Kavira right now. It's something important that we care about. It's wrapping up some of the threads that are left open from the show. But going forward, Korra is the furthest thing in the future that we know about. So where is she going? And, you know, are we looking towards the Avatar after Korra to see what's next? I think a lot of fans would prefer to go back and fill in the universe rather than, you know, expanding the edges of the universe, you know, backwards or forwards, fill in what we have, because there's obviously a huge gap in the timeline between Avatar 1 and up to his death, which we know about, and then Yang Chen, basically. We know about like a couple of events that we're sort of told about in between, but very, very little in the grand scheme of things. And there's like one Avatar did this thing with Hundun, the video game villain, and then we get mentioned another Avatar by name in The Rise of Kyoshi, but that's really all there is, like, in between, where it's clearly super, super important stuff has happened, like the formation of the nations, which we only really know about the formation of the Fire Nations specifically. What else, you know, are we going to get there? And I suppose this then transitions into, okay, they're doing the live action show, it's adapting the ATLA, but there's going to be some extras. What are those extras going to be? What are they going to do to expand on the story? Book 1 is the most obvious place where there is expansion that's probably needed. It's probably the one where if they were to write it again, you could improve upon it by maybe cutting stuff out, reorganizing some of this stuff, and just, I suppose, giving a more plot-focused section after episode 8. Like in between episode 8 and Siege and them arriving at the Northern Water Tribe, you probably should have more of a plot than just different place, different place, different place. Immediately do what the Last Airbender movie did, create a plot about Aang and waterbending, whereas obviously in the animation, Aang just learns waterbending, Katara kind of surpasses him because she's more focused, she becomes his teacher, but in general, Aang has absolutely no problem learning waterbending, whereas he has problems with the other elements, and it creates an interesting plot, character arc. Do the same for waterbending, and I think the Last Airbender movie, like, as much as people criticize it, it did get that plot right, and creating the idea of waterbending depends on your emotions and letting your emotions flow like water. And what was holding Aang back was what happened to his people, the loss that he suffered from being trapped in the ice for all that time. Having to accept that all the people he knows about have died and just let those emotions flow to allow him to waterbend, and that unlocking the power that is there within him. That works, rather than just, oh, I'm an expert waterbender, look how talented I am, and stuff like that immediately. So that's a way you can do it. Obviously, like, some people will be advocating for, like, oh, we don't need the Great Divide, so cut that out. But I'm like, honestly, if you were asking me, I'd be like, expand on the Great Divide. Like, do more with that. The Ganjin tribe and the Zhangs. Like, do more world building about the different places in the Earth Kingdom. That's probably one of the biggest successes of The Rise of Kyoshi as a book, is that it brings up the Ganjin tribe and the Zhangs as well, but kind of, even in only mentioning them once or twice in that book, kind of gives you this sort of unique perspective on it. And that one of the main characters here is an Earth Sage who is a Ganjin tribe member. And just, you know, him coming from a non-noble background, but getting to this position where he effectively is one of the nobles in the Earth Kingdom. That's really well done. And it relates to that stuff. It was the writer of this book, you know, basing stuff off what we learned about in that episode. Because I think people forget with The Great Divide that it is an episode that does a ton of world building. Canyon crawlers are one of the more interesting animals in the Avatar world. The Great Divide itself is one of the most kind of clear-cut, like, massive just places in the Avatar universe as well. It's the episode where they mention earth spirits for, like, the only time in, like, the entire series. So that's really cool. And then Aang has a bit of an arc there about being the Avatar. It's one of his first times just solving a problem as the Avatar, like being in the middle, and the Canyon Guide kind of having to also treat people neutral, and them having a little bit of a connection over it. In a way, if the Great Divide had ended with a more serious approach to the history of the two tribes, it would actually be a really good episode. Like, imagine we got the proper flashback of what actually caused the rift between the Ganjins and the Zhangs. what was this story, this history that both of the tribes have wrong and barely remember? The one where, you know, Aang just saying, oh, I was around at that time, so I know exactly what happened. Like, no, what actually was the issue that happened between these two tribes, and you know, tell that story. Like, introduce the two characters that they're talking about, the kind of almost like founding members of their tribes, and go ahead with that. That sort of a thing. I'd really like to see that, but I think it is probably more in line with just like the waterbending arc is probably more of a obvious thing you can do. I suppose some people would potentially be advocating for, like, say, someone like Suki, given where she eventually comes back in, including her a little bit more in book one to just further her setup for why it's so important when she comes back into play later on. And I completely agree with that idea. Would this be an opportunity to just kind of incorporate a lot of the comic elements that we know about into just a larger story where, like, they tell book one, they tell book two, they tell book three, but then the live action series also includes a book four, which includes, like, the promise, the search, the rift, and it just tells the story. It adapts the comics into live action. That could actually be quite interesting, depending on how they do it, to just continue on and do it. Obviously, the criticism there is that everyone would prefer them to actually be done in animation, if you absolutely wanted to. And this is coming from someone who, whenever I see people talk about the comics, like, oh, this would be interesting, like, if they animated it. Are they going to, like, make an animation adaptation of the comics? And it's kind of like, do you really not want to read comics that badly that you just, like, are desperately hoping that they get animated? In that, like, all you're missing is just sort of motion and voice acting. It's basically all there, because most of the art styles for the Avatar comics are fairly accurate to the show, and I think they're written really well as well. So, you know, those type of things are just kind of like, I just want more content. Like, if you know my channel, it's like new content, new content, new content, new content. That's what I want with the Avatar universe. That's why I put in so much time to, like, covering this book and addressing everything new that it introduced to us. And this is definitely one of the best pieces of content. I think it is the best piece of Avatar content that is not Avatar: The Last Airbender or Legend of Korra, the shows. This book alone feels like the equivalent of a third series, basically, because it tells, in my mind, like the equivalent of a season of a show, as if a show covering Kyoshi. So, you know, I can't sing the praises of that book enough, but then I'm just not at all excited about this live action kind of show. And like I said, I care about so much more about what's going on in this franchise right now, other than that. Like, live Avatar action figures were just announced. They announced the book 3 Aang, book 3 Zuko, and then the book 1 Katara figures. They're so much more interesting to me as just pieces of merchandise than them. The Avatar Funko Pops that came out this year, I was more interested in them than that. Team Avatar Tales, which doesn't even look like it's going to be that great of a comic, I'm more excited for that than the live action series. And look, I'm going to give the series a chance. I will do coverage of it when we actually start to get information on it. I don't know when that will be necessarily, but, like, what I won't be doing is, look, I don't really know actors that well, so I just do not have the knowledge to do a speculation video on who should play this character, who should play that character. I just don't have that knowledge. I'll just cover stuff like when the actors are announced, when they start to show off pictures of what the costumes look like, what the sets look like, what the CG looks like, trailers, that sort of thing. And of course, when it comes out, I will do some sort of review content on it. I won't just be abandoning this just because I'm not particularly interested in it right now. I will cover it like I basically cover everything Avatar related. But I'm just letting you guys know that right now, my excitement level is really, really low on this thing. Really, really low. So everything else Avatar-wise is just way, way, way above it. Is there anything else I need to say? No, it's pretty much just that, like, in general, just my thoughts on it are just, like, I do honestly find it weird when I see people be so excited for this live action show, and then stuff like this, the comics, and all this new content comes out, and it just sort of goes kind of ignored by the wayside, but the most minor update about the live action show comes out and everyone's freaking out, and it's kind of like, okay, I guess I just have different priorities as a fan than a lot of other people. But yeah, it's just a weird one in that I think I'm a little worried that when it gets like deep into production, when they're actually doing the filming, the shooting and stuff like this, that Mike and Brian will just be so focused on that all of the other stuff will come to a halt. Now, it looks like they're already trying, I think, to fix that potential problem if it comes in that I think we saw from the, what was it, Runes of the Empire Part 3, I think, description when that book was announced, that they're bringing in Tim Hedrick as one of their kind of sort of creative people on the book. So, assistants on this book by, usually it's Mike and Brian. But now he's sort of included in that. And I think part of that is because they are going to be very busy with the live action thing. So they need one of the show's writers to be that sort of keeping things together, keeping the continuity right, keeping the writers and artists sort of on track. And I think Tim Hedrick is a good choice for that. I just worry that once we actually do get deep into production, that might not be enough. And instead of what we have right now, which is an Avatar comic and a Korra comic more or less being released side by side, plus novels and like other merchandise, I'm worried that will all kind of grind to a halt once we're deep into production. I hope it doesn't happen, and I think that they're doing enough to make sure it doesn't happen, but this is where like you sort of need maybe a bigger Avatar story team than just Mike and Brian. And it feels like that's what they're doing with Tim Hedrick. And I'd kind of be like, if you have Jian Yang, who's done 5 Avatar comics. He's done a lot of Avatar comic. Have your sort of you have your story creative team for Avatar sort of be Mike, Brian, Jian Yang, Tim Hedrick, and like Faith Erin Hicks. They're your writers now for Avatar sort of going forward. And if Mike and Brian are going to be focused on that project, those 3 can work together on like the comics, what the novels are doing and stuff like that, and assist the writers, artists and stuff like that with what's going forward. I suppose it's just that fear of, if everything is just focused on Mike and Brian, we may really lose sight of things when there's too many projects going on. Which the biggest example of this would probably be Star Wars, with what happened with like George Lucas and like the transition to Disney and just everything that happened, and basically like the decanonization of most of the old expanded universe stuff. The reason that happened is because George Lucas was not involved with like 95% of the books, and because of that they were just able to be like, yep, they're not canon anymore, we'll just start again. And it's pretty much all because he didn't really play a role in them, and he didn't care what like the story team that was with him were doing. And that the fear is like, we don't want that to happen here, and we're already sort of entering a sort of complicated situation here where, again, they're adapting the show, but they're adding new stuff in. What do we do? Is it just another continuity where we have the animated continuity, we have the Last Airbender movie continuity, which has some new stuff in it. We have like the Chibi continuity, if you want to even call that like a combined story, and now we're going to get the Netflix live action continuity. Is that just the way we're going to have to view it, and not even attempt to mix stuff up where like the stuff that this universe doesn't cover but is covered in the story, the same story but new stuff attaches onto this one or something like that? I don't really know. That's where like a lot of questions really are going to come out of this with everything. But yeah, I think that's everything I want to say here. If you have any questions and you want me to kind of discuss stuff with you, definitely leave questions. Start some discussions in the comment section below about what your thoughts are on the live action show, addressing some of the points that I covered in this video. Let me know below. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.